Welcome to Pete's Property Podcast, brought to you by Buyers and hosted by Pete Wargent, buyer's agent, finance and real estate expert, and all-round property guru, plus published author. Join Pete for 30 minutes as he chats all things property with a new guest each week. Learn practical tips from the movers and shakers in the property industry and well-known personalities sharing their property journeys.
G'day, welcome to this week's podcast, the Pete Wargent Property Pod, with me, the eponymous Pete Wargent. I'm really excited today to have an extra special guest, Mr. Chris Gray, joining us live from Sydney. G'day, Chris. How's things?
Yeah, very good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a very familiar voice. I've heard you on a few podcasts over the years. And of course, you're many years the host on Sky News Business. It must have been, 10 years as a TV presenter and all the other TV shows you've done. I remember The Renovators, well known for your business in Sydney's eastern suburbs in particular, your empire, helping people achieve financial freedom through property. It'll probably take me the entire 30 minutes to run through your full bio, but what should I add to that, Chris, to let people know about you?
Hopefully I'm known for my lifestyle, that especially with social media these days, people say, oh, how come you never work? You're always on a boat, you're always traveling. Obviously that hasn't happened for the last couple of years, but it's really for being out and about and having fun. That's what I really kind of live by. But obviously done a lot of property stuff. Most people don't recognise me because I'm in shorts and t-shirt all the time, versus Sky was always the pinstripe suit. But supposedly my accent is a real giveaway and a unique voice. So most people recognise me by my voice.
Yeah, you're right. A bit like myself, actually. You've never really lost the English accent. It's maybe a little bit Aussie over the years, but it's quite distinctive. And as you touched on there, perhaps what you're almost best known for around the traps in Sydney is how you live this luxurious lifestyle. And before political correctness was born about 40 years ago, there was a quote from a movie where the guy said, if it flies, floats or fornicates, you should rent it because it'll be cheaper in the long run. I guess these days it might be rephrased, but I think the principle still applies. And I think it's something that you've covered in one of your books previously on how to live the life of a multi-millionaire even before you are one. Of course, these days you'd be a millionaire many times over with your huge property portfolio. But let's explore that a bit today, Chris, in terms of particularly the concept of rent vesting, which some people may not be familiar with, and living that luxurious lifestyle. But before we come on to that, just give us a bit of an overview about your early journey, your childhood and background. Whereabouts did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Radlett in Hertfordshire, so about 20 miles north of London, kind of 1 o'clock on the M25, if people know the M25, the big motorway that circles around London. Yeah, Dad was a doctor, Mum was a nurse. I hated blood, so I became an accountant. So my skill base is basically numbers. I'm good with numbers, not from a technical tax perspective, but my logic just thinks in numbers. And so that's why I got into property, really.
You don't strike me as the sort of guy who would be well suited to sitting in an office for 20 hours a day, carefully auditing numbers. But I can understand from all of your content over the years, you've definitely got a head for numbers and particularly seeing the big picture, right? Maybe that's been one of your biggest strengths over the years.
Well, one of the funniest stories was I was actually working at Deloitte's for a couple of years in Sydney, not doing accounting. I was then moved into a recruitment area. I asked one of the partners how salary sacrificing worked with cars. And I said, is it on the capital value of the car or the cost you pay? And they said, why is that? And I was trying to salary sacrifice a convertible 355 Ferrari. And they worked out that the FBT on it was more than my wages. Because I was so low in Deloitte's, no one knew my name. But they're thinking, we're the partners earning $500,000, $1 million. We can't afford a Ferrari. How come the office junior is? And that's when a lot of it came out. I said it's one of the chapters in the Empire book is it's not about what you earn, it's what you do with your money that counts. And I had, at the age of 31, I had 6 properties rising at $100,000 a year, and I earned $80,000 or 60 after tax. So it's the property that makes the money, not the salary.
Yeah, it's funny, because I've always thought to myself as quite a different personality type for yourself. I see you, I remember when I used to live in Darling Harbour, and I'd see you cruising around in the Lamborghini. And whereas I drive an SUV with blacked out windows, almost the diametric opposite. And yet, when you tell that story, a lot of equivalencies there. And I was also at Deloitte, including in Sydney for a couple of years. Wasn't particularly good at it either, I guess. But like yourself, I could see, particularly real estate, how if you were smart with your money, you could do very well from it, arguably a lot better than you did with your salary in those days, particularly. So how did you even get into the idea of real estate and property in the first place? Was it by luck, or was it through good planning, or how was it?
No, it's actually down to my mum. So I came backpacking in Australia, went back home and said to mum, right, I'm off to the pub to see my friends on Saturday night. And she said, you've got to be back by midnight. And I said, Mum, I'm an international traveller now. If I can get back from Australia, I can get back from the local pub. And she said, no, it's my house, my rules, so you've got to be back by midnight. And that was my catalyst to say, well, stuff you, I'm going to leave home. And long story short, I basically couldn't afford a one-bedroom unit, or it would take all of my salary. And I worked out the maths, and it was actually cheaper to own a 3-bedroom house because I could rent 2 rooms out to 2 mates and then actually live for free. So I ended up buying $100,000 property for $80,000 because, as you understand, in the UK, it's operated by chains, and the chain kept falling over, and I was basically a first home buyer with no chain. And so my $80,000 was a guaranteed deal versus someone else's $100,000. So I basically made 2 years' salary overnight and lived for free. And that was the catalyst to say, hey, this is a smarter way to make money rather than working for a living.
Similar part of the country, around Hertfordshire, St Albans, around there?
Yeah, so I bought in St Albans. So I describe it almost as a Bondi, but without the beach. So basically, there's no more supply of property because it's all kind of heritage and really old. It's full of kind of wealthy young kids that have got wealthy parents. They commute into the city, there are suits and earn good salaries and stuff. And so basically, from what I know now, it's all about that lack of supply, plenty of demand. So even in the GFC, people were still paying their mortgages because they still had jobs and they still had wealthy parents. And so those properties have gone from, so I actually bought 2 there, £80,000, and now they're probably £550,000, £600,000. So they've doubled and doubled and doubled.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was actually in St Albans not all that long ago, and it's a very highly desirable place these days. You know, families, young professionals, a lot of accumulated wealth there over the years. And my wife, Heather, bought her first property not a million miles away, just up in Cambridge. She bought her first house there, and she's never sold it. And then she's absolutely insisted all the way through our journey that we would never sell a property. She said, I learned this from my dad. You buy land and never sell it. So even when I fantasize about selling property and going traveling for 5 years or whatever, she just, no, we're never selling. Now, am I right in thinking you followed a similar approach, even to those earliest properties that you bought?
Yeah. Still got them. So when I first came to Australia backpacking, I had no money. The furthest I went in 3.5 months was a day trip to the Blue Mountains. So it's almost embarrassing that I had such little money, I couldn't travel. But I vowed when I came back to Australia, I was going to do everything. So I basically refinanced a property a few years before and bought a convertible Porsche at, I think, 24. And then the Porsche didn't depreciate because it had already been fully depreciated. So when I came to move to Australia, I sold the Porsche, and that basically paid for a worldwide trip. So I went through half of Africa, all the way up to kind of Hong Kong, and then down by land to Australia, 7 or 8 month trip. And it's all paid for from effectively the equity in the property. But even while I was traveling, the property was still growing in value. So that's the thing. So people worry about using equity, but it's cheaper than paying tax and stamp duty and rebuying all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly the capital gains tax, you look at opportunity to send a check to the ATO doesn't really come across as that appealing. When, as you said, if you understand financing and refinancing, it can be so much more efficient. I want to ask you in a second about what you do at your empire and how you help people on their property journeys. Before I do that, I just want to really explore just a little bit what actually motivates you, because I've seen your stuff on the TV over the years, and I've read your books and all the rest of it. I must have heard you on a lot of podcasts over the years. What is it that motivates you? I've done a bit of reading over the years in terms of things like Enneagram and personality types. You know, are you motivated by the money, or is it status, or is it more about the experiences and lifestyle?
So most of it is, I'm actually really lazy. And so most people say, oh, you can't be lazy because you're a top performer. But effectively I am. So I work hard so I can be lazy, so I don't have to do anything. And so ultimately, I never want to be told what to do. My parents did, and teachers. And so I hate that. And I want to basically be able to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whom I want to do it. So that the classic kind of lifestyle kind of thing. And so I love my cars. I want to drive cars. I want to drive boats, choppers, all of those things. Look, some of them do cost a lot of money, but as we'll talk about later on, a lot of them I rent and stuff. But I just want to have the freedom to go and do stuff. So now with COVID, I actually gave up my home office, which I'm in now. I gave it up to my wife. So I kind of got to book in to use this office now. But ideally, I'm just trying to work between 7 and 9 in the morning doing my emails. Now, half of them are probably personal stuff to do with travel and cars and stuff like that, and half of it's probably work. And then ideally, I want to be out of the house from 9 in the morning. And look, I'll have the odd meetings and I can take calls on the road and stuff, but I just basically want to be out having fun. That's the main thing. And the best quote I ever heard was, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So again, my wife would say I'm probably work 24/7. Other people say I haven't done a day's work in my life. So it's that kind of thing. So like yesterday, I was on a boat. Today, I'm on another boat. And look, I'm networking, I'm meeting people, I'm talking property. I'll pick up some clients through it, but it's really just fun. So I just designed a job that I love doing, that it's not really a job.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I remember somebody saying about me when I was at Deloitte, this guy is really lazy. And I think, I look back at what I've done over the years, and I've written 6 books, and I've traveled to 35 countries, and I've done loads of different things. And I think, well, I can't possibly be lazy. And I think it really comes down to, as you said, I don't think people are inherently lazy or otherwise. It's really, they've either got impotent goals or goals that they find interesting and inspiring, and that just doesn't feel like work. And you definitely always seem to fit into that camp. And I guess listeners won't be able to see this, but I can, because we've got the video on, and I can see in the background all the yachts cruising around from your window there in the eastern suburbs. And it's
a completely round building, so everyone gets a whole floor. Get 360-degree views, so every room's got a view, which is pretty amazing. A lot of people would see the lifestyle, and look, probably the biggest compliments I've had is someone says, "Oh, you're actually quite a nice guy. I thought you were an absolute wanker before when I see you in the purple Lambo or the orange Lambo or on the boats or the social media." But they actually say, "Well, you're pretty down to earth and you actually don't care about those things. It's just, I love driving." So I recently bought myself a fire engine. I bought a whole bunch of cars over COVID. I'm about to do my road train license, a multi-combination truck. Like I've got my heavy goods license. And so I'm doing that not to be a heavy goods driver or drive something through the Northern Territory, but I just think it's fun. So I'll do a track day, pay $1,000 for a track day. Why wouldn't I pay $1,000 to learn how to drive a road train that no one else does?
Yeah, so you've actually answered my question there. I've just been listening to what you've said. So the motivation is not really status or even money. It's largely experiences, lifestyle. And I think in particular for that adventurer personality type, probably the number one motivator is not having a boss telling you where you have to be at any given time. And clearly you haven't had that for, I've lost count of how many years, but you've basically done your own thing in your own time. So tell us a bit about what you do at your empire and how you help people in the property market today.
And also probably the thing to add that is not having a boss, but it's having an understanding wife as well. That gives you the freedom to do things as long as you reasonably behave and stuff like that. So
good life advice there. Happy wife, happy life, as they say.
Exactly. So look, in terms of what we do at Empire, so basically at 31, I retired out of Deloitte and basically stopped working for a few years. And a lot of people said, "Oh, how do you do it? And how do you salary sacrifice the Ferrari?" So I started teaching quite a few people at Deloitte, like in lunchtimes and stuff, just what I was doing. And everyone believed what I said because I had no vested interest. So I didn't sell properties or mortgages or anything else. And so I was basically just telling my story, just like I'm telling it now. And that led on to then me doing some TV. I was doing some extras work and someone said, "Oh, there's Channel 9 are looking for a presenter." And again, because I didn't represent any agencies, I was seen as the impartial person that, again, like an accountant, I wasn't a salesperson. I was just telling a story. So that's where Empire suddenly started. So then I started charging people for advice and telling them kind of what I'd done. And then I had some CEOs and they said, "Look, I don't want to learn how to do it. I don't want to deal with the agents. Can you just do it all for me?" So in 2008, I set up a buyer's agency called Your Empire. It was both for buying houses, holiday homes, investment properties, all over Sydney, kind of eastern suburbs, low North Shore in the west. And that's kind of built over the last 13 years or something like that. And it really is about, I'm doing for customers what I do for myself. So again, my portfolio is, 20, 25 million or so. And I'll say every property we buy, effectively, I'll be buying it myself. So I'm walking the talk, and I've got 100% of my wealth behind the strategy that I'm suggesting you do as well.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the big red flags, I think, in things like funds management. When you hear about, the chefs not eating the cooking, it always makes you wonder about whether people really believe in the strategy. But I guess probably more so than anybody else, you've really put your money where your mouth is. Now, just a related question. Heard a lot of stuff about this race for space over the last couple of years, and people moving to the Central Coast or the South Coast. What do you think will happen as the borders reopen? Do you think new arrivals will go to Sydney as they always have, and things will just go back to normal? I mean, I guess it hasn't really had much of an impact on prices anyway in the eastern suburbs where you would be, where prices have rocketed. But do you think demographics will go back broadly to how things were?
Look, I reasonably do, yes, because I still think that people still want to be around the major cities, and that's where the work is. That sure, people can commute, they can work from home. And we had, the odd client that was going to sell up and go up and buy up in Byron. And I said, look, why don't you just go and rent there? You never know if you're going to like it or not. And even my sister did it in the UK. She's gone pretty remote. Look, sure, some people will love it, but other people will hate it. Personally, I want to have 100 restaurants and 100 pubs and an Uber within 2 minutes of living there. Whereas the lifestyle in the Quad, even at somewhere like a Byron, I just find it too small. But look, people will move regionally. But I think the main thing for people investing in capital cities is there's still such a short supply of property. There's always going to be someone for it. And if you look at the prices in the eastern suburbs, or even over in North Shore in like Manly or the inner west, like a Balmain or something, you're paying kind of 1.5, 2 million for a two-bedder, but people can afford it. And they're willing to pay that to be in a nice boutique development that's 6 or 12 units that's been there for 50 years. And sure, further out, go to the next suburb, like a Bondi Junction or something like that, then you might be able to get a brand spanking new one in a massive tower. But how many people really want to live that kind of lifestyle? And look, it can be convenient to have 24/7 concierge, deliveries, all of that kind of stuff. There is definitely an argument for it. But I think the traditional stuff will still be there to stay.
Yeah, and I guess in the end, there's no new supply of that type of property. I think the new tower blocks, they build one, they can build 100. But if you've got something that feels a bit more like a home, even if it's an apartment or a unit, I mean, they've performed well. And as you mentioned, I think the first place I bought in Australia was in Bondi. I think I paid $500,000 for it. And at the time, people thought I was literally insane. They were saying this is not sustainable. And but look at what prices have done over the years. And you look back and think, why didn't I buy 3 of the bloody things? But I guess the answer is, you couldn't afford it at the time, but it bears out what you're saying about the demand in those key lifestyle areas, close to the city, close to the jobs, a lot of housing and household wealth. I guess we could talk all day about your property journey, but I wanted to explore is this idea of rent vesting and living in luxury. So a lot of people wouldn't even know what the term rent vesting means. So can you explain that to people?
Yeah, now I didn't come up with the word rent vesting, but it was interesting because I was speaking at one of the home bar shows in Sydney, probably, 6 or 7 years ago. And the PR agent came up with like a headline of rent vesting, which I'd never heard of. And it was like, rent where you want to live and then invest your money elsewhere. And it really kind of took off in the media, that rent vesting concept. And then what we actually found out was someone had actually trademarked it, I think, from LJ Hooker years and years ago, whereas now the word is used around all the time. But it all came from this home bar show years and years ago. So the main concept is most people can't afford to live in the house they want in the suburb they want because it's obviously too expensive. And so our parents have always told us that rent money is dead money. But the reality is rent money is only dead money if you don't invest the equivalent somewhere else, be it in shares, property or business or something else. So if you think about Monopoly and all those little green houses all around the board, they're effectively, to me, 2-bedroom units in the eastern suburbs, low North Shore in the west for, say, 1.5 million. there's generally a high demand for people that want to rent those. And generally the rents were about 4 to 5%. Now they're about kind of 3.5%. Whereas if you want to live on the hotel on Mayfair or Park Lane, effectively that's super expensive. No one can afford it. And so the rent comes down. So the rent percentages on properties that are over, say, $2 or $3 million in those same areas is probably only 1 or 2%. So, for instance, I'm in this place in Darling Point. It's probably worth, say, $5, $6, $7 million. And I think we pay something like $1,600 a week. So we're paying 70 or 80 grand a year, which people say, oh, that's a lot of rent. But if I had a mortgage for $6 million, plus I paid the strata fees here, which could be 25, 50, or even 100 grand at times, because it's an old building and then needs new fire systems and all that kind of jazz, effectively the rent return, the net rent return for the owners here before a mortgage is probably zero. So I'm better off buying 6 $1 million units, renting them all out for $600 or $700 a week. So getting effectively, 4 or 5 grand in a week, but then only spending 1,600 out.
Do you want to save on buyer's agent fees? You could save thousands with Buyers Buyers. As Australia's most extensive network of buyer's agents, we can lock in highly competitive prices. Plus, our national network of buyer's agents are some of the best in the business. So get the Buyers Buyers advantage and talk to us today. Call 1-800-975-051 or visit buyersbuyers.com.au.
A bit like yourself, I didn't even know what the term rent vesting was, but at various times now, the first place I did buy, I bought to live in as a place of residence, but then subsequently it became a rental. And then because I'm a naturally sort of person with itchy feet, I want to live here, there and everywhere. We've done a lot of renting over the years, but while investing at the same time. So I guess without even realising what the concept was, the terminology was, I just thought, well, the tax system in Australia is pretty much tailor-made for this, right? You can negatively gear high growth properties, but also rent where you live. And look, the numbers might be a bit different, but we moved up to Noosa some years ago and didn't have the budget to buy the place you want, because as you can imagine, Sunshine Beach and places like that, the house prices, well, yeah, Kevin Rudd just paid 20+ million to move in, but for 2.5 grand a week rent, you can take the pick of pretty much any property in Queensland. So yeah, the same principle. The numbers are slightly different maybe, but the principle is exactly the same. Can you apply this then to living in a luxurious manner in other areas? Like, say, you mentioned cars, boats. What about travel? Can you apply the same principles elsewhere as well?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of this, and a lot of people are surprised. We put it on the news quite a few times about the rent vesting, and most people would be embarrassed to say that they rent because they're seen as poor. And so even the old people in my building, they'd look down on us because they're the wealthy owners and we're the poor renters. Even though I was driving in the Lamborghini with the kids in the front, they say, oh, they're the poor renters. But I was kind of laughing behind, saying, no, I actually rent this for peanuts. So maybe you're the silly ones. But then, so I wrote the book, as you mentioned before, How to Live the Life of a Multi-Millionaire Without Being One. And a lot of them, there's a guy called Say With Travel. So our business turns over a couple of $1 million. I put it through on my credit card. So I get 1 or 2 million Amex points a year. And then I use those through a guy called Steve Huey, who's got a business called I Fly Flat, who teaches you how to earn more rewards and then how to actually spend those rewards on business class flights. So I would travel overseas probably about 10 or 15 times a year. I generally only travel business or first, unless I've got the kids with me. I effectively fly for free because I've got all these points. Similar concept with, say, boats. So we bought a ski boat years and years ago for, say, 100 grand. Most people never use their boats anyway. So we split it 8 ways. So we got 8 people putting in 12.5 grand each. We then have a roster system. So you basically get it for half a day every other weekend. And you get the same value in the boat, but for 1/8 of the cost. We've then done that for a $1.5 million boat. So we all put in 200 grand instead of 1.5 million, and we get to use the boat for a fraction of the cost. Now, the only downside is you can't use it exactly when you want it, but I'd rather pay 1/8 of the price and be organized. And because I'm free during the week, I can go and use it during the week when no one else uses it because they're all at work. You've got to be slightly flexible, but I'd rather pay 1/8 of the price.
Yeah, I've never owned a boat myself, and I get seasick even cruising around Sydney Harbour. But I've seen your photos online. It looks magnificent. I think actually almost a similar proposition. I remember some years ago, I got absolutely sick of flying long haul back and forth from London. I said to my wife, well, let's go on a cruise. It's like 60 days, Sydney to Southampton. And you look at the cost and think, oh, gee whiz, hard to justify. But then you think, well, you've got 60 days of accommodation and food thrown in. You don't have to pay for the flights, no jet lag. When you actually run the numbers, it may not be quite as bad as you think. And I guess the same might apply to cars and boats and long-haul flights and other things. So have you got a bucket list of things that you actually want to do over the coming 10, 20 years?
No. So my idea is I always assume I'm going to die tomorrow. So that means I've got to do it today. So as soon as I come up with an idea, I just book it and do it. So it sounds stupid to say, oh, there's nothing on your list or you've done everything in life. And look, sure, I haven't done everything in life. But as soon as I think about something, I just go and book it. So one of the things, like for people that are into supercars and stuff, I mean, first of all, I bought my Lamborghini. I think it was $750,000. I bought it about 8 years old for $250,000. I had it for 7 years, did 50,000 Ks in it, sold it in the week of COVID for 40 grand more than I paid for it. So I sold it for 290. So old cars can actually depreciate, but obviously as long as you've got the funds to pay the capital. Now, next, I think September, I'm going to Italy with a bunch of mates, and for 20,000, you can have a brand new Lamborghini, Ferrari, Mercedes, Rolls-Royce, all of these different cars, drive them for 5 days around Italy, chopping and changing cars all the time. To me, that's an amazing way of doing it, because just effectively the stamp duty on a $500,000 car is probably $20,000. So I'd rather do that probably once a year rather than having to try and buy all those cars myself.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned on the appreciating car thing, because actually around the world, particularly in the States, but also I've noticed in the UK, some of older cars have actually been going up in value with all the stimulus that's around. You'd remember the old Lotus Elise cars. A couple of years ago, you could pick up an old one for, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000. These days, good luck. You'd be paying triple that probably. A
lot of people think, oh, you're materialistic, Chris, and you're into the Lamborghinis and stuff like that. Whereas now I'm into a lot of the older cars. So my oldest car is 1912, a Ford Model T with a crank start. Now that's like a chitty chitty bang bang type thing. I've then got a couple of 1930 and 1932 Ford Tudors, like a 53-year-old Bentley that's like $40,000. So a lot of my things now, it is all about the experience and the driving. Whether it costs $1 million or $40,000, I really don't care these days. So a lot of people think it's about the money, but quite often once you've got the money, it's not about the money and you're actually doing things because you love doing them. I mean, the other week I bought a fire engine because I thought I didn't have one. And so why not go and buy one? It costs $16,000 and hopefully I'll be able to sell it in 2 years for $20,000. So it's all about just having different experiences and trying something different.
Yeah, I heard a podcast a while ago where there was a fund manager saying his idea was to remove depreciation from his life, or at least from the assets that he owned. And I think essentially that's what you're saying there. Now, some people might not be interested in getting a Lamborghini or a Lotus or whatever it may be, but the principle there is an important one, because as we all know, you buy a brand new car and as soon as you're driving off the forecourt, you're losing money. But if you're smart with your decisions, you can eliminate or at least greatly reduce the negative impacts of depreciation on your asset base. I don't want to hear about your trip to Italy because I was due to go last year and it got binned, but been the worst hit place on the planet for COVID. I've been learning Italian for a year or so. People often would say, when you mention these ideas, oh yeah, but I can't do that, Chris, because I've got a school zone I need to be in, or I need the security of tenure, or I want to own my home because there's a capital gains tax discount. So are there any disadvantages to rent vesting, or is it for everyone?
There's a million excuses for not doing it. And like anything, if you really want to do it, you can make it work. But I always say is a divorce will cost you more. So if your wife or your husband don't like it, don't force them. So it's for people that like change. It's for people that are open to things, and that if things change, then they're adaptable to it. So sure, there's you get a capital gains discount on your house, but my idea with my properties, I never sell. So if I never pay capital gains, who cares if they're CGT free or not? So when we first got married, we used to move every year. And it was, my wife was thinking, like, even though she was into it, she still thought, well, this is getting a bit of a pain. So we changed our mindset and we said, rather than dread that for a whole year we're going to move, let's assume we're going to move. So we go and rent a place. We assume we're going to move out in 12 months, and this is a 1-year adventure. When we go and then move home, if we always move to a better home, it's a positive feeling in maybe a different suburb. If every time we move, we just go off on holiday, the removalists, they come in, they pack the house, they move it, they unpack it. The cleaner comes in, she makes the beds, put the teddies in the bed for the kids, lays out the kitchen because she knows how we've lived before. 95% of the work is done. Now, my wife will probably say only 50% is done and she's got to do the rest, but in my mind, it's 95% that's been done. So suddenly, where's the negative thing about having to move to a place if you get a free holiday and you get to move to a new place and you're still saving hundreds of thousands of dollars by renting rather than buying?
I think it's something you do get better at as well. As you know, I've lived over the past 17 years. Very few people would have moved as many times as me. I've lived in East Timor, I've lived in Sydney, Darwin, Brisbane, Noosa. I'm absolutely all over the place. But as you say, you can turn that negative into a positive if that's something that you want to do. So it might not be for everyone, but if you've got a spirit of adventure and, as you say, you can actually look forward to a more aspirational place next time around. So, Chris, if we were redoing this podcast in, say, 10 years' time, what would you be doing? Would it be more of the same, or do you have an end game in mind?
Not really. So I'm not buying more property now just because I don't think I necessarily need any more money. So I'm probably roughly 50% geared. So say 22 million property, 11 of debt. And so ideally, I think I should make, say, 1 or 2 million a year from capital growth over the long term. And obviously I run a business and that pays me money as well for kind of spending and stuff. So the thought is sure, I still believe that property is going to go up in value, but I'd rather be 50% geared than have 40 million of property and be 75% geared. Because if the world changes or interest rates go up to 10%, it's going to be a lot harder to manage $30 million worth of debt at 10% than it is to manage 10 million or so. And also, I think unless you really want to live in a $50 or $100 million house, or you want to have your own private jet, why is the need for the money? So I'd rather not have that pressure, have the freedom, because I can rent most of those things anyway. And so I don't need to have anything else. So look, in an ideal world, look, I enjoy what I do. This new thing that I've done, like over the last few months of working, just trying to work 7 till 9 and doing my emails and stuff, then I'm really enjoying that. I've got a good team around me. I'm sure they contact me and they do stuff, but I enjoy being with them and doing stuff. And I enjoy the networking of business to give me an excuse to go out there and meet people and talk to people. So look, I wouldn't necessarily change anything, but obviously if life takes its turns and there's new opportunities or there's issues or stuff like that, then who knows? And 10 years time, my kids are going to be, say, 22 and 24. So my wife and I might be doing something completely different in another country. Look, you never know, really.
You're lucky. You're nearer to the end game than me in terms of the kids, because I was still young, and it feels like a million years away from getting our freedom back. But it's all good.
But look at 12 and 14, though, it's good because now they can almost babysit for themselves. They've now got phones. So if we're going out, the kids can still be at home and we're 10 or 15 minutes away or something. So it's a lot easier. And they've grown up a lot in COVID to take responsibility. Say for some of the listeners out there, we've read the Barefoot Investor book, or the Barefoot Investor Families, which talks about them earning pocket money and doing chores and those kind of things. They've been selling stuff on eBay over COVID. So it's good to get the kids growing up and to think about money and freedom and choices and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's a good tip. Big fan of Scotty Papen, the Barefoot Investor, and as you mentioned, his book for families as well. So final question for you, Chris. We could talk all day, I'm sure, about Sydney property and your cars and everything else. But one of the things that people often say to me is, oh, yeah, but it's okay for you because you started at such and such a time and you can't do that today and it's different, it's harder today. What would you say to somebody who said that to you? Is it still a good idea to invest in real estate? And particularly for the younger listeners or first home buyers, how would you go about saving that first deposit? Is it impossible? Is it harder today?
Excuse my language, but I'll call bullshit on them. People used to say, oh, it's all right for you, you're an accountant. Yeah, it was all right for me, I was an accountant, because I worked full time, went to night school in London 5 nights a week and studied at the weekends for 5 years to be an accountant. but that's seen as lucky. And I properly invested at the same time, and I took out a mortgage 7 times my income versus 3. Now I've got a $11 million mortgage. So people say you're lucky, but everyone effectively could have that opportunity if they wanted to take 5 jobs or wanted to go whatever lengths you've got to do. So look, things are different these days, but there's so much education. When we grew up, there was no education. There was no books, no TV, no magazines, no nothing. Now, if anything, they've got too much information. But there's a young guy in our office called James Brown. And if people Google him and then The Telegraph, there's a couple of articles read about him. And he bought his first property at 21. He was working in a pub and at university and had just started doing a bit of part-time stuff for us. He bought with his cousin. Both of them couldn't afford to buy by themselves. They bought a 750 grand one-bedroom in Vaucluse. So they got into the eastern suburbs in a one-bedroom unit. That property is now worth probably 900 grand. And everyone was saying, don't buy in COVID. You shouldn't do it. And that's why The Telegraph picked up the story, because he was a young first home buyer. Then this year, I think about 3 or 4 months ago, he bought another property, I think in somewhere like Neutral Bay, a one-bedder, and that was all by himself. He's now working kind of part-time for us or almost full-time, so he's earning more money, but having the equity from the first property to bounce into the second. So this guy now, I think he's either 21 or 22, and he's got 1.5 properties in Sydney, and he works his backside off. He's worked for free for me at times for doing some property development stuff, really keen to learn, just soaks it all up, and will do whatever it takes, obviously legally, of course, to get a step up. He's going to be wealthier than me, I'm sure, in 20 or 30 years' time. Yeah,
it's an interesting comparison, isn't it? I remember we set a goal years ago of buying a place at Darling Harbour, because I just thought, imagine how good it would be to live down there, and basically gave up drinking for a year, which for anyone who knows me, that's probably the closest thing to living purgatory for somebody like myself.
That's un-English of you.
No, but I wasn't very good at doing it in moderation anyway. And I basically took up marathon running because I just couldn't bear the thought of not going out on Friday nights. But yeah, we basically saved every cent for a year to do that. And, you can look back and say, oh, well, it's okay for you because ... But in the end, it's really about, as you said, doing what you can when you can and just being prepared to sacrifice if you have to. So I mean, the dynamics may have changed a bit, but there's always markets you can get into. You can beg, borrow, or steal those deposits. So, Chris, it's been brilliant today. If people want to know more about your empire, more about your journey, and also if they want to get a copy of your book on how to live the life of a multi-millionaire without being one, where can they go for more?
Yeah, sure. So both of the 2 main books that we've got, they can get for free. Just go to yourempire.com.au or just Google Chris Gray, Gray. You can get them on PDF, you can get them on audiobook, and we can even send you a physical one. So there's a whole bunch of videos on YouTube as well if people want to listen to those kind of things, and stacks of articles. But look, most of the stuff I put into my book, The Effortless Empire, and that'll give you 95% of what you really need to know. And then it's really a case of building the team around you. So as you'd know, it's get a good mortgage broker that deals with other investors, an accountant, all of those kind of people around you. And there's nothing to stop you. Whether your first property is 50 grand or $1 million, it doesn't matter. You just need to get out there. And that's probably my biggest tip is just do something. Even if you do crypto, which I don't believe in, but just do something. Just get out there, because if you don't take any shots, you're never going to hit the target.
No, you do hear a lot of stories about people waiting for everything to be just right. But of course, by doing that, you do tend to miss out on the opportunity. So, Chris, thanks so much for today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'll actually be on a flight to Sydney fairly soon. So I'll keep an eye out for the Model T or the Fire Engine or whatever else you're driving around in. Look forward to catching up and hearing more from you in due course. Cheers.
Wonderful. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to Pete's Property Podcast, powered by Buyers. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as Pete chats all things property with a new guest. And just a reminder that the information provided in this podcast is general advice only and doesn't take into account your personal financial situation or needs. You should always consult a licensed professional to discuss your individual personal circumstances.